On the afternoon of November 7, 1896, a party of 11 men entered the western approach to Donner Pass, carrying full packs and 3 days of provisions. By November 10th, all communication had ceased. By November 14th, the first search team found only abandoned equipment and a single wool coat frozen to a pine trunk. No bodies were ever recovered from the high country. The party's leader was Charles Brennan, 41 years old, a surveyor employed by the Central Pacific Railroad. He had crossed the Sierra Nevada range 14 times in 8 years. His logbooks, preserved at the California State Archives, show meticulous attention to elevation markers, snowpack density, and weather patterns. He was not reckless. He was confident. The men under his command were seasonal workers recruited from Sacramento and Reno. Most were in their 20s. Several had never seen snow above 4,000 feet. Their names appear on a handwritten roster dated November 4th. Porter, Gibbons, Latimer, Hayes, McKee, Donnelly, Chew, Vargas, O'Brien, and a man listed only as Swede. The 11th name is Brennan's own. The assignment was routine. The railroad required updated survey readings along a proposed spur line between Truckee and the summit. Winter was approaching, but Brennan had made similar trips in late October without incident. The Weather Service in Sacramento, still operating on telegraph reports and barometric observation, had issued no warnings. The sky over the valley was clear. On November 6th, the party assembled at the railhead in Truckee. Witnesses described the men as orderly and well-supplied. A station clerk named Milton Reeves later testified that Brennan seemed impatient to depart. He kept looking west. Reeves told investigators, said he wanted to be in and out before the storms moved down from Canada. Brennan's personal correspondence, found among his widow's effects in 1923, includes a letter written to his brother on November 5th. In it, he mentions the trip briefly. 3 days up, 3 days work, 3 days back. I'll be home before Thanksgiving. The party left Truckee at dawn on November 7th. They followed the rail grade west for 6 miles, then turned north onto a Forest Service trail that climbed toward the ridge. A timber crew working near Prosser Creek reported seeing them pass around midday. The foreman, a man named Hollis Grant, later said the group appeared steady but slow. He noted that 2 of the younger men were already breathing hard at 7,500 feet. By late afternoon, the party had reached the base of the pass. Brennan's logbook contains a final entry made at 4:27 in the afternoon. The notation is brief. Elevation 8100 ft wind NW, light, sky clear to summit. Proceeding. What the logbook does not record is that sunset on November 7th occurred at 5:14. Brennan made the decision to enter the pass with less than 47 minutes of daylight remaining. In mountaineering doctrine of the period, this was not forbidden, but it was discouraged. Forest Service manuals from 1894 advised parties to camp below 8,500 feet if summit passage could not be completed by mid-afternoon. Brennan had read those manuals. His personal library, auctioned after his death, included a copy annotated in his own hand. He chose to proceed anyway. The western approach to Donner Pass is a steep corridor flanked by granite cliffs. Wind accelerates through the gap, often reaching 50 miles per hour without warning. In November, temperatures at the summit routinely fall below zero after dark. Brennan knew this. He had written about it in prior reports. But he also believed he knew the terrain. His confidence was not arrogance. It was experience. 14 crossings without serious incident. A reputation for reliability. A wife and 2 daughters waiting in Sacramento. At some point between 4:30 and 5 o'clock on November 7th, 1896, Charles Brennan led 10 men into the pass as the light began to fail. That decision would define everything that followed. To understand why Brennan proceeded, it is necessary to reconstruct the conditions that shaped his judgment. The winter of 1895 had been mild. Snowfall across the Sierra Nevada was 30% below average. The pass remained open until mid-December. Brennan had completed a survey in early November of that year without difficulty. His logbook from that trip notes favorable conditions, minimal ice. The summer and autumn of 1896 were similarly dry. Sacramento recorded only 4 inches of rain between June and October. The high country was brown and exposed. Forest Service rangers reported seeing granite visible at elevations where snow typically accumulated by mid-September. Brennan was not the only one who believed the weather would hold. Timber operations continued into early November. Freight wagons were still crossing the pass as late as November 5th. A shepherder named Angus McBride brought a flock of 200 sheep over the summit on November 3rd. He later told investigators the trail was dusty. This pattern of normalcy created a kind of collective confidence. Weather was understood through precedent. When the precedent was favorable, decisions followed accordingly. Brennan's correspondence throughout October reflects this mindset. In a letter dated October 19th, he writes to a colleague in Nevada, "The range is quiet. I expect we'll have access until Thanksgiving, maybe longer." Railroad supervisors shared this view. The survey assignment was issued on October 28th, with an expected completion date of November 12th. No contingency for early storms was included in the planning documents. The men Brennan hired were not mountaineers. They were laborers accustomed to seasonal work. Several had been employed on rail construction crews during the summer. Others worked in sawmills or freight yards. They trusted Brennan because he had a record. In their world, a man with 14 crossings knew what he was doing. Pay records show that each man was offered $8 for 9 days of work. This was above average for unskilled labor in 1896. For men like Hayes and O'Brien, who had families in Reno, the money mattered. They would not have questioned the timing. Brennan's own financial situation was stable, but not comfortable. He earned $75 per month from the railroad, a solid middle-class wage. But he had debts: a mortgage on a house in Sacramento, medical bills from his younger daughter's illness the previous winter. He had turned down 2 assignments earlier in the year due to scheduling conflicts. This trip represented steady work heading into the holidays. None of this was unusual. Brennan was a professional doing his job under conditions that seemed manageable. The decision to enter the pass at dusk was not made in panic or desperation. It was made in the context of experience, routine, and reasonable expectation. But there were signs. On November 6th, a rancher named Thomas Whitley, living 10 miles south of Truckee, noted in his diary, "Wind shifted north in the afternoon. Felt like snow coming." Whitley had lived in the mountains for 30 years. He did not report this observation to anyone. It was simply a personal notation. On the morning of November 7th, the station clerk, Milton Reeves, later recalled that the air felt heavy. He could not explain what he meant by this. "Just a feeling," he said. "Something in the pressure." A timber foreman working near the pass on November 6th reported that his crew had difficulty keeping fires lit after dark. "Wind kept changing direction," he said. "Smoke wouldn't draw right." These observations were scattered, subjective, and unverified. They did not constitute a weather warning. In 1896, meteorology was still an emerging science. The U.S. Weather Bureau had been established only 6 years earlier. Forecast accuracy beyond 24 hours was poor. Brennan would have had no reason to treat these fragments as significant. At 4:27 on the afternoon of November 7th, standing at 8,100 feet with 47 minutes of daylight remaining, Charles Brennan looked at the sky and saw nothing that contradicted his experience. He gave the order to move forward. The exact sequence of events between 4:30 and 6 o'clock on November 7th can only be reconstructed from evidence recovered later. No member of the party survived to provide testimony. What follows is the most plausible account, based on physical artifacts, terrain analysis, and weather records. At 4:30, the party was approximately 1 mile from the summit. The trail at this elevation follows a natural shelf carved into the western wall of the pass. To the left, granite rises vertically for 300 feet. To the right, the ground drops away into a boulder field. The trail is 5 feet wide in most places, narrower in others. Brennan's logbook contains no entries after 4:27. This suggests he secured the book in his pack and did not stop to make further notes. The party was moving. Sunset occurred at 5:14. Astronomical twilight, the last usable light, ended at 5:43. This gave the party approximately 1 hour and 16 minutes to reach the summit and descend far enough on the eastern side to establish a defensible camp. Under ideal conditions, the distance could be covered in 90 minutes. But the party was carrying heavy packs. Several men were already fatigued from the day's climb. The pace would have slowed as the light faded. At some point between 5 o'clock and 5:30, the wind increased. Weather station records from Reno, 40 miles northeast, show that barometric pressure dropped sharply after 5 o'clock on November 7th. Wind speeds increased from 8 miles per hour at 4 o'clock to 26 miles per hour by 6 o'clock. The wind was out of the northwest, funneling directly into the pass. Brennan would have felt this change. Wind at elevation is unmistakable. It makes the air colder, the footing less stable, the sense of exposure acute. He had two choices: turn back or push through. Turning back would have meant descending in darkness over terrain the newer men did not know. It would have meant admitting misjudgment. It would have meant losing a day of work, possibly more. Pushing through meant maintaining forward momentum, reaching the summit before full dark, and descending the eastern slope where the terrain was more gradual and the wind would be at their backs. Brennan chose to push through. This decision is inferred from the location of the first artifacts. A broken pack frame was found 400 yards below the summit on the western approach. The frame was identified as standard issue railroad equipment. It had been abandoned in place, not dropped. Someone had unbuckled it and left it behind to move faster. 1,600 feet from the summit, searchers found a wool blanket wedged between two rocks. The blanket was folded, not discarded. This suggests a deliberate decision to lighten a load. These actions indicate that the party was struggling but still organized. Brennan was making calculated adjustments. He was trying to increase speed without losing control. The summit of Donner Pass is a wind-swept saddle of exposed granite. There is no shelter. In November after dark, the temperature drops rapidly. Wind chill becomes the primary threat. The party reached the summit sometime between 5:30 and 6 o'clock. We know this because a surveyor's tripod, identified later as belonging to Brennan, was found 50 feet east of the summit marker. The tripod's legs were extended but not locked. This suggests it was set down in haste. At 6 o'clock, the temperature at the summit was estimated to be 12 degrees Fahrenheit. With wind speeds of 30 miles per hour, the effective temperature was 20 degrees below zero. The human body loses heat rapidly in these conditions. Without shelter, without fire, survival time is measured in hours. Brennan would have known this. He would have understood that stopping at the summit was not an option. The only viable strategy was to descend the eastern slope as quickly as possible and reach the tree line, where the wind would break and fire could be made. The eastern descent from Donner Pass is less steep than the western approach, but it is longer. The tree line is 2 miles below the summit. In daylight, the route is straightforward. In darkness, with wind and fatigue, navigation becomes difficult. At some point during the descent, the party began to separate. Evidence for this comes from the distribution of artifacts. A kerosene lantern was found 1 mile below the summit on the eastern slope. The lantern's glass was intact, but the fuel reservoir was empty. This suggests it burned out while still in use. A second lantern was found 300 yards further down. This one had been dropped. The glass was shattered and the metal casing was dented. A canvas pack containing food rations was discovered 400 yards south of the trail. The pack had been opened but not emptied. This suggests someone left the trail, either to rest or because they became disoriented. By 7 o'clock, the party was no longer moving as a unit. Brennan's final known position is inferred from the location of his logbook. The book was found in a leather satchel beneath a Douglas fir 1.5 miles below the summit. The satchel was partially buried in snow that fell during the night of November 8th. Inside the satchel were Brennan's logbook, a pencil, a folding knife, and a pocket watch that had stopped at 9:42. The logbook's final entry, made on the western approach at 4:27, remains unchanged. There are no notes from the summit or the descent. This suggests Brennan did not stop to write. He was moving until he could no longer move. 9:42. The watch stopped. Whether from cold, impact, or the cessation of the man who carried it, we do not know. The first alarm was raised on November 10th. Brennan's party had been expected to return to Truckee by November 9th at the latest. When they did not arrive, the station clerk Milton Reeves contacted the railroad's regional office in Sacramento. A telegraph was sent to the Forest Service station at Cisco, 12 miles west of the pass. On November 11th, a 3-man search team departed from Cisco. They followed the eastern approach, assuming the party had crossed the summit and might be delayed on the descent. By mid-afternoon, they had found the first artifacts: the broken lantern, the scattered pack, the frozen wool coat. The coat was identified by a laundry mark as belonging to a man named Donnelly. It was tied to a pine trunk at chest height, as though someone had hung it there deliberately. The sleeves were stiff with ice. The search team returned to Cisco and reported their findings. A larger operation was organized. On November 13th, 12 men with pack mules ascended from both sides of the pass. They found more artifacts, but no survivors. The surveyor's tripod, the leather satchel, a kerosene can, a pair of boots, a tin cup, a torn section of canvas tent. All of these items were catalogued and photographed. They were later displayed at an inquest held in Truckee on December 2nd. No bodies were recovered in November. Snow had begun falling on the night of November 8th and continued intermittently for 6 days. By November 15th, the pass was impassable. The search was suspended until spring. In April of 1897, a Forest Service crew returned to the high country. They found skeletal remains at 4 locations, all within 2 miles of the summit. The remains were scattered and incomplete. Animals had been active over the winter. Identification was difficult. One set of remains was found beneath a rock overhang, 600 yards south of the trail. A second set was located in a drainage gully, half buried in silt. A third was discovered near the tree line, wedged between 2 fallen logs. The fourth was found on the summit itself, partially covered by wind-blown debris. Forensic analysis, limited by the standards of the time, suggested that death had occurred from exposure. There were no signs of trauma, violence, or avalanche. The men had simply stopped moving and did not start again. The official report, filed by the Truckee County coroner on May 9, 1897, concluded that the party had been overcome by adverse weather conditions following a misjudgment of available daylight. The railroad conducted its own inquiry. The findings, preserved in the company's archives, were blunt. Brennan's decision to enter the pass after 4 o'clock in the afternoon of November 7th was inconsistent with established safety protocols. No evidence suggests coercion or equipment failure. The incident resulted from human error. Brennan's widow, Margaret, received a settlement of $200. The families of the other men received $50 each. These payments were classified as death benefits, not compensation for negligence. Public reaction was muted. The disaster occurred in a remote location. None of the victims were prominent. The newspapers in Sacramento and Reno ran brief notices. The San Francisco Chronicle published a single paragraph on November 18th under the headline, "Survey Crew Lost in Sierra Storm." There was no storm. Weather records confirmed that snow did not begin until the night of November 8th, more than 24 hours after the party entered the pass. What killed the men was cold, wind, darkness, and distance, all of which were present because of the decision made at 4:27 on the afternoon of November 7th. In 1903, the railroad installed a weather monitoring station at the summit of Donner Pass. In 1912, they established a formal policy prohibiting work crews from traveling above 8,000 feet after 3 o'clock in the afternoon between October and April. These measures came too late for Charles Brennan and the 10 men who followed him. In 1928, 32 years after the incident, a historian named David Carrick published a regional study titled Forgotten Crossings, Sierra Nevada Work Accidents, 1870-1910. The book includes a 7-page section on the Brennan party. Carrick interviewed 3 individuals who had known Brennan personally. One was a railroad supervisor who had worked with him from 1890 to 1894. Another was a surveyor who had accompanied Brennan on a crossing in 1895. The third was Milton Reeves, the station clerk, then 71 years old and living in Grass Valley. Reeves told Carrick that he still thought about the party. "I saw them leave," he said. "They looked like every other crew. Nothing special, nothing wrong, just men going to work." When asked if he believed Brennan made a mistake, Reeves paused before answering. "I don't know what I would have done," he said. "I wasn't up there. He was." Carrick's book is out of print. A single copy is held in the California Historical Society's collection in San Francisco. The pages on Brennan are annotated in pencil by an unknown reader. Next to the description of the decision to enter the pass, someone has written in the margin, "Why didn't he stop?" That question has no satisfying answer. Brennan was experienced. He was equipped. He was sober, healthy, and clear-minded. He made a choice that thousands of men in his profession had made before him. Most of those men survived. He did not. In the decades since, the site of the disaster has been absorbed into the landscape. The modern highway crosses Donner Pass 4 miles south of the original trail. The western approach is now a hiking route used primarily in summer. Few people walk it in November. In 1976, a researcher from the University of Nevada located Brennan's grave in the Sacramento City Cemetery. The headstone is simple: Charles E. Brennan, 1855-1896, surveyor. There is no mention of the pass, the party, or the manner of his death. Margaret Brennan, his widow, never remarried. She lived until 1931, dying at the age of 73. In her final years, she gave a single interview to a local church newsletter. The interviewer asked if she blamed her husband for what happened. Margaret said, "He thought he could make it, that's all. He thought he could make it." The logbook, the pocket watch, and several other artifacts were donated to the Nevada State Museum in 1954. They are stored in a climate-controlled archive and are not on public display. Requests to view them must be submitted in writing. On the afternoon of November 7th, 2010, a documentary crew filming a segment on Sierra Nevada history visited the western approach to Donner Pass. They reached the site where Brennan's logbook was found. The light was fading. The wind was picking up. The crew decided to turn back. One of them later wrote in a blog post, "We were only there for an hour and we could feel it. The cold comes fast. You don't realize how fast until you're in it." At 4:27 in the afternoon, Charles Brennan looked west and saw a passable route. He had crossed it before. He believed he could cross it again. He was not reckless. He was not ignorant. He was a man doing his job within the boundaries of what seemed reasonable. 47 minutes of daylight, 1 mile to the summit, 10 men trusting his judgment. He proceeded, and that was enough.